Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah. This is my granny era, and this is a response video to my sweet friend Anne, who has the channel In Search of Wonder. If you have not yet visited Anne's channel, the link is in the description box. Go there now. Shut off this video, go visit Anne. She has a fantastic channel. She's so inspiring and encouraging. She is definitely one of my favorite booktubers. We have a lot in common, it seems, the different books that we like to read and things that we like to talk about, perspectives, etc. But recently Anne put out a video called There's No Such Thing as Spoilers, and I was like, what? So I immediately had to watch it because I do not agree with that statement whatsoever. And as I was watching the video, I got about 5 minutes in and I stopped and I messaged her and I was like, Anne, I need to make a response video. Is this going to wreck a friendship? And I started keeping notes because I have so many responses to her video and her thoughts. So that's what you're getting today. You're getting the response video to Anne In Search of Wonder, There's No Such Thing as Spoilers. Now, there's a couple things that I want to say first. Number one is that you only understand what you understand. People only get what they get from you, okay? So if I am misunderstanding Anne, and if the things that I say she said she didn't actually say or she didn't mean it that way, then I 100% apologize and the fault is completely mine. So let's just be clear on that first. Secondly, I want to say that I think it's really important that we don't really be dogmatic either way about how we feel about the subject of spoilers, because it's literally just a preference, right? There is no right or wrong. It's just, what do you prefer? For me, I definitely do not want a spoiler. And I do think they exist, and I think they're rotten. And so I don't want to know anything. Like, if you can keep all information and spoilers away from me, that would be really awesome. Thank you. But I know that that's not super possible. And so I have certain things that I do to keep myself from having a book spoiled for me. I don't read reviews until I'm done. I don't, like, if a booktuber starts talking about something that I know I'm planning on reading and they're starting to get really in-depth, and so I had to turn somebody off recently who was talking about Piranesi because I could tell, like, all her other books she had talked about, she kind of went into details, and I was like, whoa, I'm getting ready to read that. So I turned her off and said I'd come back after I'd read it, which reminds me, I need to do that. I do think a book can be spoiled, and so I have written down some notes here to sort of respond to some of the points that Anne made in her video. Anne does not think, it seems, that a book could be spoiled, or that it is a big deal if it is, for the most part. So that is kind of the two sides of this story that we're looking at today. So I would recommend that you watch her video so that you get her point of view, and then think about it, like, what do you prefer, and what and how far is too far when it comes to spoilers for you. One of the things that she talks about is, for most literature, she believes that even if you know, like, the main thing, that it can't wreck it for you because it depends on the storytelling ability of the author, right? So say, you know, Little Women has, like, some devastating things and some happy things and some things you weren't expecting because you thought it was going to go another way. And if I told you all of those things right now, from Anne's perspective, you could still get a lot out of that book if it were well written, right? If you find it to be a well-written book, then knowing the devastating things and the happy things and the shocking things and, you know, how it all ends, wouldn't be a big deal, because you still have the enjoyment of that story. You still get to see it unfold. You still get to, you know, experience it, even though you know what's going to happen. And she uses a lot of examples of why she believes that to be true. She talks about how, you know, sometimes we watch the movie first, or, you know, we read a kid's version, or we're doing a reread or whatever. So that's all the kind of stuff that I want to talk about. But going back to that example, for me, I want to have that same sense of beauty, that same anticipation and discovery that you know, fellow booktuber or fellow reader spoiled that they got to have, right? When they read Little Women for the first time, they came to a part that they were like, no, and the tears started flowing, right? They came to a part where it was just like so joyful. It was just like, oh, I'm so glad. I was hoping that would happen. And then it happened, right? Or they come to a part that was just like so surprising. You're like, wait, what? What? No, wait, what? And, all of those emotional reactions that I would have for the first time discovering the story of Little Women, I don't get those if somebody already told me all this stuff. I know the devastating thing is going to happen, so I'm just waiting to get to that part. Yeah, I'm reading all the stuff up to it, and yeah, I'm experiencing all the little this and that to whatever of the March sisters, daily life, but I know that this thing is coming. So my whole feeling of hope that it won't happen, my whole feeling of, oh, maybe that's a foreshadowing that leads to a good thing, right? A good outcome or whatever, like all of these feelings that I would be feeling that lead up to then just the devastating feeling of, crushed now because it didn't happen the way I thought it would. I would miss all of that. When it comes to the happy, joyous, wonderful thing, I would know what's happening, right? So I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so that's how that happened, and that's how that worked out, and that's how that came about. But I would never have the, I'm so glad, I was hoping that would happen. No, I don't get that. I don't get the weird thing at the end, right? Wait, that's not where the story was going, right? You know that it's happening, so you're just kind of waiting for it to happen, rather than letting it happen, getting that first anticipatory discovery, awe-struck experience that we sometimes get in literature. Now, she goes into how a lot of times we kind of figure it all already because of tropes, right? And that's true, right? Like there's nothing new under the sun. So there's lots of tropes out there. And for the most part, once you get so far in a story, you figured out the trope and you figure out what's going to happen. And then you just kind of are along for the ride. But sometimes you do get a really cool plot twist in there. Sometimes you do get something and you're like, oh, wow, okay, so I knew it was going to happen this way, but I didn't know it was going to happen like that, right? So I just feel like for the first time, no, a spoiler is a bad thing. I also think that spoiling a book for somebody gives it does a disservice to the author, right? Because the author spent that time creatively mapping out this story and writing and rewriting and orchestrating this tale in such a way that you would have all of those experiences I just talked about. She wants to bring about surprises in her story. She wants to bring about emotional responses in her story. And how much more surprises and emotional responses are we going to have if we don't know what's happening, right? So we've taken something from readers when we spoil a story. We have. I just think it's just not our right. Now, I don't know what sparked Anne's video. She didn't actually go into that, but she made it sound like she's heard a lot of militant people going off about spoilers. That would be me. I am a militant anti-spoiler advocate. I'm thinking of one in particular that still just ticks me off, and it was months and months and months ago. But I was reading the biography of Agatha Christie that Lucy Worsley wrote. I'm going to keep my Lucy Worsley ranting to 3 minutes or less. Go ahead and time me. But in that book, she is talking about Agatha's different stories, and she talks about one particular story that I just about almost said, whoops. And she tells you who the murderer is. And she tells you that it's like one of the most creatively written stories that Agatha Christie ever wrote. It's like one of the best stories. It's considered the perfect murder mystery because of how she reveals the murderer. And then she tells you who the murderer is. And I'm like, thanks. Because Agatha Christie wrote like, what, 4 billion different stories? And the one that is considered to be the very best of all of them, you just spoiled for me. I was not pleased. I was not pleased, and I'm still not pleased. Anne says in her video that if spoilers were a problem, then we would never reread anything. And then she goes on to give some reasons why she believes that. And they're valid reasons, they're great points. However, for me, I reread for a completely different experience than the first read, right? For the first read, I am on a mission of discovery and a mission of understanding and a mission of uncovering things, and it's all new, right? When I reread something, I already know what I'm getting. I want to re-experience some of that, right? It won't be the same because I know what's coming, but it was such a fantastic story. I want to experience that same, maybe that cozy feeling that it gives me, maybe that weird sort of freaky feeling it gives me. There's a story that I talked about in December called Wait Till Helen Comes. It's a ghost story from my childhood. And up until this very last time that I read it, which literally was probably like the 370th time I've ever read that book, I have been completely freaked out. Even just 4 or 5 years ago when I read it, I was totally freaked out. This time I was just like, I'm not going to be freaked out. I'm just going to be fine. It's going to be fine. But I was still sort of like flipping on lights as I'm going to the kitchen, sort of a thing. So it is possible to get similar emotional responses no matter how many times you reread a book. Yes, I definitely concur that point. But it is definitely a different experience than enjoying it for the first time. So I know that going in. Sometimes I want to reevaluate something that I've read before, right? I might read it again and love it even more than I did, and sometimes love it even less. Like I talked about with The Secret Garden in my last video, that it's getting kind of not so great the more I read it, right? So I need to like give more time in between so that I can come at it with a different life perspective, right? If I wait another 10 or 12 years and then read it, I'm going to be a completely different person, right? And so I will have a different perspective. So it changes, right? Sometimes you pick out things and you're like, yeah, maybe I don't like this book as much. Maybe the first time was the only time that I'm going to get those feelings and emotions, which is all the more reason not to spoil a book for someone, right? Because maybe they only have one shot at it. I don't think that has very much to do with an author or whether or not they are a good writer. I just think it has to do with each person and how they personally respond to it. How much do they have invested in this thing? How into it are they really? How much emotions are they giving to this work, right? And so that can be done with a good or a not so good author. I think it has more to do with how is this affecting the reader. Now, I have no problem with really any of this. If you want a spoiler, like ask for one, right? A lot of times people will ask me, how do you get into the classics? Like, how do you get into Jane Austen? It's so difficult for me to understand her, the words she's using and all these sorts of things. And a lot of times I will say, go watch the movie first. Go find yourself a good, BBC version, something that was put out by the same people who wrote it. Get yourself a good movie version and watch it and get the story, get it. Watch it a couple of times. Make sure you understand the story. Then go read the book, right? So obviously that's spoiling the book with the movie, but, what do they want out of it? They want to understand the story. They're not so big on all of the many adventurous thrills of Jane Austen, which there's not a whole lot, right? Like, what's going to happen. But they want to understand the book. They want to be able to say, I have read Pride and Prejudice. I have read through it and I understood it, right? So help them understand. Get them a film version. Tell them the spoilers. Walk them through it, right? Tell them the basic points. Tell them who matches up with who and why and all stuff, right? So spoilers, fine if you want them. But there are a lot of people out there who don't want them. And I think that's why we need to be careful when we're making our videos and when we're writing our Goodreads reviews and that kind of stuff. Like, I personally do feel like it's a service to society that we be careful not to give spoilers. At one point in her video, she talks about introductions and how they give a framework to the story. That's totally fine if you want that. For me, I try to avoid introductions because a lot of times they give away a lot of stuff in the story, right? And it is full of a lot of spoilers. And then you have some person, pretentious or not, explaining to you all the ins and outs and deep points and philosophical whatevers and all the things that you're supposed to be getting out of the story, right? They will explain all that to you in the introduction. But for me, not only does it give spoilers, but it also gives interpretations. And I think that is one big problem that I have with introductions. I don't want you to interpret the story for me. I am intelligent and I am thoughtful and I have an imagination and I can understand words, and I'd like to interpret the story from my own perspective first before I read what other people had to say about it, right? I want to form my own opinions. I don't like to judge people based on the opinions of others, right? If someone's like, hey, I would just want to warn you about so-and-so because blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't like that. I would prefer to judge someone based on my own opinion of them and my own experience with them. And I feel the same way about books, right? So I'm avoiding not only spoilers, but I'm avoiding interpretations. I'm avoiding someone telling me this is what you should get out of it. And so, yes, sometimes I will read something and then I'll go back and read the introduction or reviews or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I didn't get that out of it. Or I will totally disagree, which is what actually usually happens. And I'm like, no, that is totally not what the story is saying. Or no, that is way off. Or no, this author is not a genius. She's actually a complete moron, Virginia Woolf. Another thing that Anne was talking about, this was the portion of the video where she was talking about not like reading reviews or in like watching, you know, videos that might have spoilers or whatever. She says that if we don't do that, we can be missing out on a lot of engagement with the wider world of the book and sort of like closing ourselves off. Now, I would say, first of all, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with me not wanting to engage with the wider world of the book, and there's nothing wrong with me closing myself off if that's what I want, right? Sometimes I might just want to be alone with my story and not involve anybody else. And I don't think that it doesn't necessarily make me less intelligent or, you know, less, intellectual or whatever. It just means that my opinion and takeaway is the only thing that really matters to me, and that's okay. Like, and maybe some of that depends on, you know, your profession or why are you reading the book in the first place, right? If I need to understand interpretations because I'm teaching this book, or, that would probably be the main reason, I think, is if you were teaching it, you were sharing it with somebody else, and you're trying to go deep and you're trying to get all the different perspectives and the different, understandings and whatever's so that you can pass that information along, then yeah, maybe you should do that. But if it's just for you and your own understanding, like sometimes you just don't really care and you don't really want to know. So that doesn't make me less intellectual. It doesn't mean I'm not, there's nothing wrong with not engaging with the wider world. So that's basically what I'm trying to say. But the second point is you can always go back and read that stuff afterwards. You can always go back and read the opinions and the commentaries and engage and have the Discord discussion and all those different things. Just do it after you read the book, right? I read the Vinland Sagas on the first day of April, and it is the April read for Sagalong. Now I've got the whole month of April now to have the discussion and, get what everybody got out of it and talk about it and go through it or whatever with that group who's going to talk about it online somewhere. I don't know where I got to figure that out because I read the book already, right? I read it first in my own time, in my own way, without reading everybody else's stuff on it. Now I can go back and engage. Now I can go back and read the commentaries and whatever. Another thing is that I want to get all of my thoughts and opinions and responses out, written down on paper, it's solid, solidified, before I start engaging with others. Because when I do that, my initial first impressions are going to then be clouded, right? I'm not going to remember, as hard as I try. I probably am not going to remember every first impression, first feeling, first thought that I had on this work if I start engaging, right? As soon as I start engaging. And so I want to get all of that stuff written down and solidified so that I know this is what I thought about the book before I started talking with others about it and before I started allowing myself to be influenced. I actually think that makes for better engagement rather than worse. Because once I have everything written down, my own perspective and my own thoughts, and I have all that solidified, then I have something to contrast with, what Anne said when she read The Secret Garden and she got all this stuff. And then I can be like, oh, I got all this stuff. And I'm able to put those two points of view up against one another. I can see then how my engagement with Anne talking about the story has now helped me to grow. It's helped me to discover things that I hadn't seen before. Having that experience with her in discussing the book has allowed me to mature in my perspective. But going in blind right from the beginning keeps me from being influenced by others so that I have my own thoughts. I'm responsible for my own thoughts. I know what my own thoughts were. They're not being clouded by the thoughts of the others that I'm later going to engage with. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that I was militant. I'm not really militant about it. I mean, do what you want. I just like to avoid, if possible. I take certain steps to try to avoid when I can. I appreciate a warning, but hey, I'm not gonna like shut off your video if, well, maybe I am. I did shut off the Piranesi girl. But ultimately, it's our channel. It's our Goodreads. It's our whatever. So we can say whatever we want to say and write whatever we want to write, right? It's up to the reader to be careful about avoiding spoilers the best that they can. The only time I get really actually mad about it is when you get like these pretentious people that act like you are less educated if you haven't read this book and already understand it. The mentality is you should already know this if you're a well-read person. Do you know how many like hundreds of thousands of millions of books there are in the world over all of the years? Like nobody's read everything. And even if they have, nobody's understood everything. And even if they have, everybody has a different perspective because they grew up somewhere different and they pronounce things differently and they see the world from a different way. And to just assume that somebody has read this because it's a classic and so duh, you get that mentality. That's the mentality I try to avoid in the introductions to fiction stories, especially. It's mostly in classics is where you find introductions in fiction stories. I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to avoid the overinflated, pompous opinions of the old man who's been studying Charles Dickens for the last 45 years in the cellar of some university somewhere. Like, tell me what a housewife thinks, right? Tell me what a 25-year-old college kid thinks. I just want to know what regular old people think. You know, tell me what Randy, the literate Texan, or Mark, who's sitting up in Bohemia, or Debs from Nottingham, like, tell me what my regular old friends think about these books. That's the kind of, you know, information that I think that I can respect more than scholarly stuff. I don't know. It bugs me. I think I respect those peer reviews more than, you know, the scholarly. But no, for the most part, I do not want spoilers. I do think they mess with your reading experience. I do think that they exist and that they shouldn't. I think the only time I do want to know what's happening in a book is basically if I'm just being warned about objectionable content. If somebody sees something on my TBR and they're like, that doesn't look like something Sarah would read. Like, I would like to be told, hey, that book contains da-da-da-da, are you sure you want to read that? And so that has actually happened a couple of times, right? I do a book haul and I'm like, yeah, somebody said this was such a great book and I'm showing it off or whatever. And then I get to reading it a couple months later and I was like, why? Didn't really want that book featured on my channel. Oops. So, you know, let me know if I got something if I show something in a book haul and you guys know my character personality and my likes and dislikes and you think I'm probably not going to want to read that, tell me. I want to know that. Now, I do want to say before I finish up that Anne's video has changed me. Not only did it make me think about all this stuff, but it has actually helped me to see the instances in which I do appreciate an introduction that is very informative, that talks about what I'm going to be reading, that gives me some backstory, that gives me some understanding. And that is in the nonfiction, especially history stories that I'm reading. In this last week, I have read 2 introductions that I probably would have skipped over had I not watched Anne's video and thought, you know what? I'm going to read this introduction and see if maybe they're not such a big deal. And if maybe I'm, you know, making a big deal out of nothing. So I read the introduction in this book called Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston. It tells the story of the last, basically slave trading ship that came over to America from Africa and the people that were on it. And the whole actual interview with the guy that was one of the people on the ship is only like 20 some odd pages, but this book itself is like, well, if you add in all of the notes and everything, it's like 170, because there's a lot of notes and afterwards and introductions and things in here to explain this interview and the backstory and the history for today's society that probably had no clue that 50 years after, you know, the Atlantic slave trade was abolished in America, they still had people doing it illegally, right? We didn't know all that stuff. I didn't even know it was abolished that early before slavery was abolished. Like, I didn't know any of that. So the introductions actually served to help me to understand this short little interview in here with this man. Also, the whole interview is written in the way this guy talks, right? So what's the right word for that? Like his dialect or whatever. It is written phonetically in the way he is saying things. So you really have to, you kind of got to get that voice in your head, which makes you feel like a weirdo when you're a white girl from Eastern Oregon. So I think that in this book, the introduction was absolutely vital, or I wouldn't have had a clue what was going on and why it was going on. And then the Vinland Sagas, which I also read this last week, has an introduction that is way longer than the actual sagas, but it gives you the whole history of who these people are, why these sagas were written, what was, you know, what else was going on, right? Because the sagas are what these Norsemen had written about their trip over here to North America and their settling of Greenland and that kind of thing. But there's a whole bunch of other history that the average American does not know about Norsemen, right? And their past and you know, all this stuff. So it's really important actually to read through the introduction for this book, because then you're going to understand what's going on in these very short sagas that basically just do a whole lot of name dropping and not a whole lot else. So the introduction to this story talks all about the historical context, but the things that have been found, the evidence for them having actually been here in North America, and the different places that people think that they may have been, the studies that have been done since finding these sagas, and, you know, how it spurred them on to go do archaeological digs and all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, you would not get hardly anything out of those sagas compared to how much you get by reading the introduction. So I'm going to back up a little bit on what things I've said in the past. Thank you, Anne, for helping me to see a perspective. When it comes to nonfiction, especially historical things like this, I think an introduction could be vital in a lot of cases to help us understand a work that doesn't fill itself out, right? This 20-page interview with this man who was formerly in slavery, interviewed by a young journalist, needed some filling out, right? I needed to understand what's going on here. These stories of the settling of Greenland and the expeditions to North America by Norsemen from, you know, 1,000 years ago or whatever, needed some filling out. I need some context. I need to understand what I'm reading. Why does this matter now? Why would a white girl from Eastern Oregon want to read about Norsemen from 1,000 years ago? Like, why am I reading this, right? It filled it out for me and gave me an understanding and just a context for caring, right? So I will say that they are needed there, but I'm still going to avoid them in fiction stories at all costs. So I want to thank Anne for the video. It was very well thought out. It was very well done. You had made a lot of really great points and caused me to think a lot, caused me to feel challenged and wondering about my own perspective. I hope some of my thoughts maybe are doing the same for you. I don't know. It's okay if not. But I appreciate Anne. I appreciate her channel and everything that she's doing for the book community, all of the great events that she has going on this year, and her very active Discord channel. I hope, like I said, if you have not checked out Anne's channel, be sure and do that. She is a gem on BookTube for sure. She puts a lot of work and effort into her videos, and they are just fantastic. So hope everybody is having a great day. I would love to hear your perspective on spoilers in the comment section. Please do let me know what you think about all this stuff. And have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.